This one this morning is it's a testimony more than anything, I think. But I think it's something we need to talk about. And so I'm going to kind of give you my story, I guess, a little bit. But it began, more or less, just a few weeks ago for me to this extent on Christmas Eve of all days. But it's been a thing for me off and on for a while, for the better part of a year at least. But it came to a head, I think. It really started to show itself on Christmas Eve. Linnell was home. She was recovering from her sickness, pneumonia, and all of that. And Lainey and I decided we were going to go to Tipton and get a couple of things. And something wasn't right, though, with me. It just something, I just didn't feel right. I teetered on the edge, actually, at one point, on just taking myself to the emergency room because I knew something just wasn't right. And bless her heart, Lainey knew what was going on and convinced me just to go home. But she, in her wisdom beyond her years, she knew what was happening. I was having a panic attack. And I'd never had one before. I honestly, I didn't like it. I don't know anybody who does have them that likes them. And I don't know if you would classify what I was experiencing that day as mild or severe, but I'll tell you one thing, it doesn't matter. It wasn't fun. And I wasn't enjoying it at all. It was just flat out scary. And I felt like I was having trouble breathing. I kept trying to take deep breaths. That was my thing. My chest hurt. I was shaking. We got home. I ate a little something, and then I spent most of the afternoon in bed. And by that evening, I had calmed down enough for us to have a very nice family get-together, gift exchange, and all of that, just the kids and Linnell and me. And so by that evening, it was okay. Then, 4 days later, Tuesday, December 28th, 2021, it happened again. And this time I was just right over there in that little room we call my office. And it hit. Same stuff, same feelings, same sensations, all of that stuff. I kept trying to take deep breaths. I felt like I couldn't breathe. And my chest was hurting. I was shaking. All of those things. This time, finally, though, I said, all right, that's enough. I called my doctor, and I made an appointment, and they got me in that afternoon. And so that's kind of where it began, but there's a little bit of a backstory with all of that I'm going to tell you. And this all kind of came to a head, I think, really started to become an issue for me in September. And I've been told now by a professional, we'll get into that in just a minute as well, that everybody has a line. Okay, everybody has a line in their life, and I had crossed mine. Or you could say everybody eventually hits a wall, and I had hit mine. And so September was kind of when it started to feel like, okay, this is going to be something that I'm going to have to deal with. And so I did. And I was in with my doctor for just my yearly exam. And one of the things that she asked me toward the end is, well, is there anything else? And she had already told me. She'd already given me my gold star. She said, your health is great. Everything's good. She even cut my cholesterol medicine in half. And I'm ready to be off of it personally, but she cut it in half. And so all of those things, she'd given me a gold star. But she said, is there anything else you want to ask or talk about before you leave? And I said, well, yeah, I'm having some anxiety problems. And I can tell that I'm having anxiety problems. And I hadn't had any of these panic attacks yet or anything, but I knew things were kind of coming to a head. And I told her then, I said, I've made an appointment with the Christian counselor that we have supported as a church for years. And I've known him for years. And I've made an appointment with him. I just haven't gone yet. The appointment's a few days away. And she said, well, If that doesn't work, or if you feel like you need more, she said, IU Health offers psychologists that you can talk to for free. And so I said, okay, that's good information for me to know in my profession first, but that's also good for me to store away later if I need that. So I met with Charlie Herber, who, like I said, we've supported for quite a few years, many, many years here. He's an excellent counselor. The man knows the Bible backwards and forwards. I mean, if you go to him and you're seeking counseling, be prepared because it's a whirlwind. The guy just, look this up, look this up, look this up. And I'm constantly saying, slow down, Charlie, I'm writing this stuff down. You know, and that sort of thing. And he's very biblically knowledgeable and very helpful. But I found out I needed a little more. And the problem with that was, with Charlie, the problem I had with Charlie was, we're friends. And it became more of a just two friends hanging out, and it was helpful, but it wasn't everything I needed. So I decided it was time to move on. December 22nd, okay, and you can remember these dates, but I can remember this date because it was our 26th anniversary. But we celebrated our 26th anniversary by Linnell going to the doctor for her follow-up after being in the hospital. And so she goes through the whole procedure, and she got her gold star that day. And then at the end, as our doctor often does, are there any questions? Is there anything else I can help you with? And Linnell said, yeah, what can you do about this one's anxiety? And I was thankful that she did it, and we had talked about it before, the appointment, and our doctor gently reminded me, well, it's not your appointment. And I said, I know that, but she was gracious enough to listen a little bit, and she told me, she said, if you want to make an appointment, I just don't have time to do anything really right now, but if you want to make an appointment later, I'd be happy to talk with you about it. And so we left, and I made the next appointment, like I said, for December 28th when I had that little setback in my office. What happened that day can be described nothing else as just a God thing. And when I went to the appointment and sat down with my doctor, she knew why I was there. And because it had just been a few days before that we had talked about it. And she kind of wheeled her little cart right in my face, basically. And she said, I have what you need if you're willing to go with it. And I said, well, that's why I'm here. And she said, when I saw you were on the schedule for this afternoon, I went to one of the psychologists, and she had already told me that there was one she had in mind. She thought he and I would get along very well. She said, I went and checked with him, and it just so happens his schedule is available, or he is available, and he's right outside the door if you want to talk to him. And I said, Doc, that's what we call in my business a God thing. Send him in. And so in he came, and we met, and that was my first meeting with this psychologist. And it has been helpful. He's helped me work through some things. He's helping me work through some things. It's still a process. I'm still doing it. I'm still going through it. And I don't know how long I will, but that's okay. I'm in it. And I'm going to stay with it and work on it. And I want you all to know, I'm in no way, shape, or form ashamed to speak with you about it today. I'm just not. Because it's a testimony. In my mind, it's all turning around and becoming a testimony as to how God works. Plus, I'm convinced churches don't spend enough time talking about these sorts of things. Churches don't spend enough time talking about mental disorders or mental health. We talk about a lot of other things, but I just don't think we do enough with this. So, I'm in a position where I can, and I'm going to do something about it. And it's going to happen today. And the fact is, I feel very confident in saying I'm not the only one in this room right now who struggles with some level of anxiety or some sort of disorder when it comes to, we all have anxiety. I don't want you to misunderstand that. We all have anxiety. It's part of us. It's wired into us. The problem is when we fear the anxiety. That's where your problems start, and that's where my problems were starting. And so I know that there are some who struggle. And so I'm going to talk about it. And another fact is, most people who do struggle with anxiety, they do it silently. And I, however, will not. I've told people if anxiety thought it was going to pick on somebody who was going to keep their mouth shut, it didn't do its research. And so I'm not going to keep my mouth shut about it. I don't have a problem talking about it. Therefore, I encourage you, if you are struggling, speak up to someone. Because the Bible tells us that we're supposed to share one another's burdens. And so that's one of those burdens that we need to share. As a matter of fact, Romans 12:15 says, rejoice with those who rejoice, mourn with those who mourn. So the Bible makes it very clear that we should share these burdens with people. I want you to listen here. We're going to prove this point. Okay? Take a look at the prayer list. We just had it up there just a little bit ago. We don't hesitate whatsoever to talk about physical problems, heart conditions, kidney stones, cancer, whatever. And there's nothing wrong with that. But we don't hesitate to talk about that. Mental struggles? Nope. We don't talk about that. We love to talk about the physical symptoms of things. We love to talk about, for example, I'm going to use the word, I hate the word, but I'm going to use the word. We love to talk about the physical symptoms of COVID. We love to talk about it. We're obsessed with it. As a society, we're obsessed with it. But we love to talk about that. But how often do we talk about the mental aspect? And there is a mental aspect to this thing. It goes well beyond the physical stuff that we talk about. The isolation. We're made to be with other people. This thing keeps us apart from people. It isolates us. We're made to be social. And when we can't be social, that has an effect. For me personally, COVID took me away professionally. It took me away from 2 funerals that I was supposed to do. I was absent from Dave Hills when I had it, and I was absent from Bill Sherwood's when Linnell had it. I didn't like that. That worked on me up here because I don't like that aspect of not being able to do the things that I'm supposed to do. What about when you lose someone who's near and dear to you? That to me, that was the line. When I talked about somebody, everybody has a line, that to me was the line. I lost someone who was near and dear to me to this evil plague, and that was what did it for me. That does something to you. And then when someone who's even nearer and dearer to you kind of goes through the same thing, it ends up hospitalized and all of that stuff, that works on you. And so here you hear so much about the physical, but you don't hear about the mental. And there's a huge mental aspect to this thing. And I think we, in some sense, why don't we talk about it? Why don't we talk about mental issues and things like that? Well, I think in some sense we think, well, we don't talk about it because it's taboo. We're afraid to talk about it. We don't hesitate to admit when something's wrong in here or whatever, but we're hesitant to say when things aren't quite right up here. But it happens. And I never thought it would happen to me, but it does. And the fact is, I'm learning that you have to admit at some point in your life that you're no longer bulletproof. And there was a time in my life where I thought I was, but I'm not. And most of us have come to understand that. But there's a stigma to it. Plus, we're kind of hesitant because we don't necessarily know how to deal with someone who is struggling in these areas. I just don't know how to help you. So I'm just going to pretend like nothing's wrong with you. And we get into that situation as well. Well, we don't know how to deal with heart problems either, but there seems to be no lack of advice when someone has one. There seems to be no lack of compassion when someone has a heart problem. But when someone has a head problem, we put them over here. And we just rather not think about it. Just look at how we address these issues. I have a very good friend who used to be in the ministry, who suffered, as long as I've known him, he has suffered from anxiety and depression. He's just had this problem for as long as I've known him, and I've known him for a long, long time. And there was a time early on before I really understood it, and before I experienced it, to where I thought, dude, just snap out of it. But think happy thoughts. Relax. Whatever. Count your blessings. But the fact is, would you say those things to someone who just had a heart attack? Dude, relax. Count your blessings. Count your blessings. That's not going to work. It's absurd to think that we could tell someone who's having a heart attack, just think happy thoughts, and you'll be okay. It's ridiculous. Well, but that's how we handle things when people are having a mental issue. You see, the compassion we show for a heart condition versus the compassion we show for a head condition are profoundly different. Profoundly different. Now, we look at this from a biblical aspect, and that's something that I've enjoyed personally as I've gone through this journey. I've enjoyed looking at things through a biblical lens, which is what we're supposed to do as followers of Christ. But if you look at this from a mental, if you look at mental issues through a biblical lens, that's what I'm trying to say, you're going to see that there are mental conditions even in the Bible. Some of these people that we read about and we've heard about for so many years, there are some signs here. They didn't know back then what to call it, but there are some signs of these things. If you would, look at a lot of, just in your personal time, but if you read a lot of David's Psalms that he wrote, there are a lot of symptoms there of someone who has a little bit of a bipolar issue. I mean, honestly, he goes from one extreme to another in a lot of his Psalms. Psalm 13, for example, shows us here, I'm going to read Psalm 13 to you, and just listen to the language that David uses in this psalm. How long, O Lord, will you forget me? Forever? How long will you hide your face from me? How long must I wrestle with my thoughts and every day have sorrow in my heart? How long will my enemy triumph over me? Look on me and answer, O Lord my God. Give light to my eyes, or I will sleep in death. My enemy will say, I've overcome him, and my foes will rejoice when I fall. And then, it's like he shifts gears. But I trust in your unfailing love. My heart rejoices in your salvation. At the beginning, it doesn't sound like he's rejoicing. But now, all of a sudden, he's rejoicing. I will sing to the Lord. At the beginning, it doesn't sound like he's ready to sing, but he says here at the end, I will sing to the Lord, for he has been good to me. He's been good to me, but at the beginning he says, how long are you going to forget me? Forever? You see, there's a whole shift change going on here. And it's just from one extreme to the next with David, and there are many, many other examples in his Psalms of the same sort of thing. Elijah, for example. The prophet Elijah, he was depressed. He was even suicidal. Look at 1 Kings 19. Or you don't need to look there, but you can look later. I cheated. I put little marks here where I can find, in fact, quickly. But in 1 Kings 19, starting with verse 1, it says, Now Ahab told Jezebel everything Elijah had done and how he had killed all the prophets with the sword. So Jezebel sent a messenger to Elijah to say, May the gods deal with me, be it ever so severely, if by this time tomorrow I do not make your life like one of them. Elijah, it goes on here in verse 3, Elijah was afraid and ran for his life when he came to Beersheba in Judah, he left his servant there while he himself went a day's journey into the desert. He came to a broom tree, sat down under it, and prayed that he might die. He had some problems here. He had some issues going on. I've had enough, Lord, he said. Take my life. I am no better than my ancestors. Then he lay down under the tree and fell asleep. Now the story is, this didn't happen this way, but here was Elijah so depressed, at such a point of depression in his life, that he laid down and just said, okay, Lord, take me. Take me home. There were some issues there. I talked last week a little bit about Jeremiah, who showed overwhelming evidence of depression. If you don't understand that, just read the book of Lamentations. I talked about that last week. Lamentations, the first part of that word is lament. Lament means you're sorrowful. You're writing down your woes. Lamentations is an entire book of woe is me. And you can't read Lamentations and think Jeremiah didn't have some sort of depression going on. So it's evident in Scripture that these men and women of the Bible, they had problems. They had mental issues that they were dealing with. And we have to remember, the brain is an organ. The brain is an organ just like the heart. And so why wouldn't Satan target the brain? I mean, the brain controls everything. So why wouldn't Satan go after that? Why wouldn't he choose to torment people in their minds? Now, fast forward to Jesus and look at how he dealt with these things. In Matthew chapter 9, verses 35 and 36, it's up here on the screen. He says, Jesus went through all the towns and villages, teaching in their synagogues, proclaiming the good news of the kingdom, and healing every disease and sickness. Okay, I want you to keep that stored back there in the back of your mind for just a second. Healing every disease and sickness. When he saw the crowds, he had compassion on them because they were harassed and helpless like sheep without a shepherd. Okay, so keeping that in mind, healing every disease and sickness. Blindness, lameness, the woman with the bleeding issue, all of those things. But then we meet the guy in Mark 5. And he's in Mark 5, starting with verse 1. And it says, they went across the lake to the region of the Gerasenes, and when Jesus got out of the boat, a man with an evil spirit came from the tombs to meet him. This man lived in the tombs, and no one could bind him anymore, not even with a chain, for he had often been chained hand and foot. But he tore the chains apart and broke the irons on his feet. No one was strong enough to subdue him. Night and day among the tombs and in the hills, he would cry out and cut himself with stones. So here we see Jesus, this is an example that part of every disease and sickness included mental issues. Because he healed this man as well. It was more than just someone with a heart condition. It was more than someone with a bleeding condition. It was more than someone with just leprosy. Just leprosy? No, with leprosy. It was everything. Jesus healed every disease and sickness. Jesus, bottom line, he ministered to those who needed help. That's what he does. He eases suffering. And this is why I've learned to take heart from the words of James chapter 1, verses 2 and 3. Consider it pure joy, my brothers and sisters, whenever you face trials of many kinds, because you know that the testing of your faith produces perseverance. I've learned to be thankful for this season. I've learned to be thankful for this affliction because God is using it to create in me a testimony that I believe will help others, either individually or as a group. And I believe that it's important that we talk about these things and I'm not going to keep my mouth shut, and I don't think any of us should if we have these issues. Because you consider it pure joy whenever you face trials of many kinds. Because in that, it produces us and helps us to develop in such a way that we're going to be able to help. And again, I feel like all of this has developed in me a testimony, and you're hearing part of it today. You're only hearing part of it, but you're hearing part of it, and you're going to hopefully feel a little empowered now by hearing that. And it seems so backwards. Consider it joy? Yeah, that's what it says. Because it helps us grow. It helps us become more mature believers, and it helps us help others. So when anxiety comes into your life, or when that fear of anxiety or whatever comes in and you start to feel those feelings, it's important to say, oh, okay, well, welcome. We're going to have some joy today. And you're going to go with me. And so come on, Mr. Little Anxiety Dude. You're in for a treat. Because all of these things do help us grow and help us learn. I've also learned to better understand what Paul was talking about in 2 Corinthians 12, where he talks about the thorn in his flesh. In 2 Corinthians 12, and we're all very familiar with it, and it seems like this verse has been coming up a lot lately. But Paul says in 2 Corinthians 12, starting with verse 7, he says, to keep me from becoming conceited. That's interesting. That's interesting. To keep me from becoming conceited, because of these surpassingly great revelations, there was given me a thorn in my flesh, a messenger of Satan to torment me. 3 times I pleaded with the Lord to take it away from me, but he said, what did he say? He said, my grace is sufficient for you, for my power is made perfect in weakness. Okay, my power, therefore I will boast all the more gladly about my weaknesses, so that Christ's power may rest on me. That is why, for Christ's sake, I delight in weaknesses, in insults, in hardships, in persecutions, in difficulties. For when I am weak, then I am strong. You see, that I've gotten a little better understanding of where Paul was coming from when he wrote this. We don't know what the thorn was in his flesh. We just don't know. There are a lot of guesses about what it could have been, but we simply don't know what it was. But 3 times he said, I asked God to remove it from me. And the fact is, sometimes God doesn't remove afflictions. But sometimes he uses afflictions to lead us to transformation. And I think that's more important. I think that's better. He doesn't remove the affliction, but he gives us his grace so that the affliction works for us and not against us. Okay, I want you to get that. He doesn't remove the affliction, but he gives us his grace so that the affliction works for us and not against us. Paul wanted the thorn gone. Obviously, he wanted it gone. Whatever it was, he wanted God to take it away from him. He asked for it 3 times. Take it away from me. I have prayed early on that my anxiety issues be removed. But Paul learned, and I have learned, and I'm learning, that those thorns are there to teach us to rely more on God, to rely more on his strength. Our weakness allows God's power to shine more brightly. And so he's letting that shine more brightly against the backdrop of our weakness. And the church should be a place where we're not ashamed to own up to the fact that sometimes we hurt. The church should be a place where we're not ashamed to own up to the fact that, you know what, sometimes I'm just flat broken. I'm just broken. So what I want to say to this is, first, don't be afraid to ask for help. Don't be afraid to seek help. That day that Linnell asked our doctor if there was anything she could do about my anxiety, ended up being a huge breakthrough for me. Yes, our doctor was gracious enough to listen to me, and she even examined me very, very briefly just to assure that I was physically okay. She listened to my heart, she listened to my lungs, because those were my biggest things. My chest hurt and I was having trouble catching my breath. So she graciously listened to that. And then the only thing she said was, as she looked over the top of her glasses, as she's so good at doing with me, she said, the only thing I hear is a heart beating a little faster than it should because you're, her words, all worked up. Okay. I felt better. Because I knew physically I was okay. So now I've got to go another route and get things taken care of. And that day was the beginning of me seeking help. That I really needed to go another step. On the other side of the coin, don't be afraid to seek help, but on the other side of the coin, don't be afraid to offer help. If you sense that someone seems troubled, don't be afraid to reach out to them. You don't need to fix them. It's not your job to fix them. Maybe all you need to do is just listen to them. Just listen. Let them talk. Sometimes that's all they need to do is just have someone, a sounding board, so to speak, that they can bounce this off of. And I didn't ask permission because, well, it's easier to ask forgiveness than permission. But that's what Joe did a couple weeks ago. He just sensed it. He called, and I answered the phone, and he said, "You doing okay?" And I said, I just thought, hey, this is just a usual conversation. "You doing okay?" I said, "Yeah." And then he said, "No. Are you doing okay?" And I said, or he said, he followed that up, "No, are you doing okay?" And this is the part I love. He has a way with words, that Joe. "You're not acting right." And I said, "Oh, you noticed." But that listening ear was helpful. And that's all it was. He didn't fix me. He just listened. And he let me kind of rant a little bit and talk to him about what I was doing and how I was going about the help and all of that stuff. Or someone else recently noticed that and mentioned it to me that they noticed some things and different things about it. And that began a conversation between me and that other person. And we talked about the fact that we each struggle with anxiety. And we were able to bounce things off of each other, and it helped, and it opened up a conversation that I think helped us both. I know it helped me, and I think it helped the other person. So sometimes a person just needs some compassionate listening. So don't be afraid to seek help. Don't be ashamed to seek help. If you're there and you're having these issues, get help. There's no stigma. There's no reason to fear it. Just own up to it. Again, be that person that says, "Okay, anxiety, you picked on the wrong person," because I'm not going to shut up about it. Sometimes that's what we need. But also, don't be ashamed or afraid to just ask someone, "You okay?" Most likely they're going to start out and say, "Yeah." And you may have to get to the point to where you say, "No, are you okay?" Because you're just not acting right. I want to close by looking at Luke 10, and it's a story we all know, but I want to wrap it up into how the church should respond to this. Luke chapter 10, starting with verse 25, and I'm going to read all of it. And then we're going to tie it all together here. And hopefully we'll understand a little more. Luke 10, starting verse 25. On one occasion, an expert in the law stood up to test Jesus. "Teacher," he asked, "what must I do to inherit eternal life?" "What is written in the law?" he replied. "How do you read it?" And he answered, "Love the Lord your God with all your heart and with all your soul and with all your strength and all your mind, and love your neighbor as yourself." "You have answered correctly," Jesus replied. "Do this and you will live." But he wanted to justify himself, so he asked Jesus, "And who is my neighbor?" And in reply, Jesus said, "A man was going down from Jerusalem to Jericho when he fell into the hands of robbers. They stripped him of his clothes, beat him, and went away, leaving him half dead. A priest happened to be going down the same road, and when he saw the man, he passed by on the other side. So too a Levite, when he came to the place and saw him, passed by on the other side. But a Samaritan, as he traveled, came where the man was, and when he saw him, he took pity on him. He went to him and bandaged his wounds, pouring on oil and wine, and then he put the man on his own donkey, took him to an inn, and took care of him. The next day he took out 2 silver coins and gave them to the innkeeper. "Look after him," he said, "and when I return I will reimburse you for any extra expense you may have." Which of these 3 do you think was a neighbor to the man who fell into the hands of the robbers? And the expert in the law replied, "The one who had mercy on him." And Jesus told him, and he makes it very clear to us, "Go and do likewise." Jesus makes it very clear, don't be like the priest. Don't be like the Levite. Be like the Samaritan, because he's the one who showed mercy. So what is the church's responsibility in all of this? Right there, Jesus tells us, go and do likewise.